All right. Hey, folks. Bunk here, Bunkman Hangout. Hey, today, Jake Pratt's back with me. Hey, Jake. And he had a fantastic idea uh, about an idea for this month, for this video. So it's June. And with that comes it's Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. And he thought, hey, it'd be great to talk about it, especially given what he's been through and, what I've been through in my, not only in my career, but my personal life. For those who don't know, aren't familiar, Jake on 8 March 2024 was in a helicopter crash. There were four on board. He was the only survivor. With that came, there's the survivor's guilt, the trauma that goes along with, the mental part of that aspect. And also, Jake is paralyzed from the waist down. Okay, so there's a physical aspect as well. So I thought, hey, man, let's go ahead and just talk about it. Let's talk about our journeys. And the idea is to get the issue out there. So if there are others who are watching this who are suffering for whatever reason from mental health issues, there's hope at the end of the rainbow. And so, dude, if you want to go ahead, just start us off, man, and let's go.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
I
brother.
know we
Thanks.
we did this about a few weeks ago, a month ago,
Yeah,
um,
about 3 weeks
and we
ago.
talked
Yep.
about my incident and kind of the physical portion of it and what
Hmm.
it's done to me, the changes that I've had to make in my life to kind of adapt to that. But seeing that it is June and Mental Health Awareness Month, I think it is important for people like us, people who have physical, mental, emotional traumas, and also people who have military experience and have been in leadership roles. I think
Yeah.
it's important for us to be able to show pretty much anybody else that this is something that can be talked about and should be talked about.
Right. And we had discussed that one of the big things was for me is being embarrassed, right? Because it was embarrassing me to talk about because I felt that if I said anything that I was having issues, that I was weak. And it absolutely might, the way I was trained in the United States Navy, and I'm specifically talking about my mishap, but there's more to it in my life, which we'll get to.
Mm.
But it was like, hey, man, I don't want to talk about it because I come across as a weak human being. And I don't want that uh, to be apparent. The thing is that, talking about getting help doesn't make you weak, man. It makes you strong. So, yeah.
Yeah, well,
So,
I feel like that's the kind of misconception that comes in the military, right? Because we're always taught to just kind of adapt, drive on, push on, figure it out. And I will say that while I was still in the military, that is very much the mindset that I had.
yep.
Up until the very end of my career, I had a relatively easy career. I had one deployment. I didn't have that much traumatic experiences come along with it,
Mhm.
but there were some. And again, it was one of those things where I had people below me, looking up to me, and I was supposed to take care of them. So at the time, I felt, I need to kind of push all that, my own shit aside, push it down, and make sure I can take care of those guys, which in a way felt almost hypocritical because, it was me telling them, hey guys, make sure you're taking care of yourselves. If you need help, you can come to me, yada, yada, yada. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here avoiding those type of things. So, which is
Right.
exactly why I want to bring this up now because I finally got to a point where I have sought help. I have started therapy and things like that. So
Right.
yeah, it's not a weakness. It's just you have
Right.
to be willing to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so being a naval aviator and, placed in leadership role, I remember in 99, my first deployment, and my daughter's 8 months old. And so it's the day where we have to leave. And, it was so tough, man. Tears are flowing. But by the time I get to the aircraft, I cannot have my enlisted folks and other officers see me cry. I just can't, man. And so they have to
Right.
see strength and resilience. So I always looked at it that way. I'm like, hey, no matter what, I have to show strength and resilience. But with that, what we were doing, what we're taught is we compartmentalize, right? So we lock things away. And there's time and place for that. But sometimes doing that with regards to trauma is, from my experience of years, is not exactly a wise idea. I always like it like this. And, we have a backpack of experience in life. Well, let's call it our trauma backpack. And, if we go all the way back to my childhood, it was a rough one. I had a stepfather, who was abusive, physically abusive, mentally abusive. And so that's the first part of my life is my backpack now has that. I joined the Navy, start flying, and on 12 March of 2003, I have my mishap, aircraft. I was an instructor pilot, right seat, guy left seat. I did something stupid. I did the best I could to mitigate what happened, but we end up um, off the runway, 160 degrees away from our original heading, on fire. We all walk away. You know what happens, and that's kind of like I like to say that's my journey into PTSD, but really it wasn't. It was my childhood trauma. But what happens is now my backpack gets some more stuff. Now my job, flying out aircraft carriers, pretty stressful, pretty tough. And okay, so it was, just standard stuff in life. And then comes my Afghanistan tour. And for me, I mean, I was an ISR pilot. It's not like I was a soldier or Marine or SF, in the shit. All right. So, I mean, the scariest part of that whole thing was the weather, flying in awful weather. Now, granted, I don't know, like I think we talked about maybe 50 or 60 rocket attacks. Not rockets, but they were
Like the
mortars,
borders.
right? Yeah. And I had one
Yeah, IDF.
explode.
Yeah,
Yeah. IDF, really, really close to me one night. And so there is that point, some more stuff to put into my trauma backpack. And I start at that point when I was flying, I knew something was happening. I was not sure what was going on. And then, of course, when my brother dies from cancer, uh, all that led up to a point where my backpack overflowed and I started to fail. And what I mean by fail is I started to fail in life. You know, I started bad behavior with drug use prior to that. Painkillers it was my drug, but it really ramped up at that point because what did I not do? I
yeah,
didn't get help. Yeah. So I mean, that's just kind of a quick overlay of what was going on in my life. Now I know you said you had
yeah,
deployed to Afghanistan. You did a year-long deployment.
yeah, yeah. It was like
Yeah,
11
okay,
months.
11 months, and IDF attacks and things like that. Do you think that at all affected you? I mean, so let's go prior to your crash.
Right. Yeah, I mean, prior to the crash, the really Afghanistan was the only thing in my career that I think had a lasting, somewhat negative impact.
Okay,
I had been in some sketchy situations in an aircraft before. That's just part of the job, though. I mean, once you get used to it, that's why we have debriefs. We talk about what happened. We try to mitigate it so it doesn't happen again. That's part of the job. But Afghanistan, that was my first time being in a medevac company. Like I said before, I loved it. I got a lot of good things out of it. But it was the first time that I saw it mangled bodies, for lack of a better word. I saw a lot of brains. I saw a lot of things that a lot of people shouldn't have to see.
right,
Um,
like folks wounded
and
or,
as part of
dead.
it,
Yeah.
yeah, we unfortunately we lost a lot of people that.
Okay.
Um, and it was one of those things where we would get there and we would pick up the guys. Unfortunately, they were gone before we could do anything to them. Which was surprising to me because I went into there thinking our job is to go get these guys, fix them in the air on the way to the next level
Right.
of care. And there were a handful of times where we got to do that, but there was also a handful of times where we didn't even get the chance.
Right.
So for me as a crew chief, I never dealt with that. I was air assault for most of my career. I was picking things up, putting them down, kicking guys out, easy shit.
Right.
So luckily, the medics that I worked with, they unbelievable medics. First of all, they were the things that they can do, and the thing that their mental state is just incredible.
They
And I
have to
was
be
lucky to have
on.
them because they were kind of there.
Right. I was saying, well, they have to be on another level, man. In order to do the
Yeah,
job that they do, they have got to be in a mental state that's up here. Otherwise, they can't perform where they need to perform. Yeah. Makes sense. Okay. Right.
but unfortunately, that very first call was the one that stuck with me for the rest of the deployment, and honestly, up to today. Um, that was the one that kind of gave me. That was the beginning of my nightmares, you could say.
Right.
Uh,
Okay. Well, it's the first one, the first time makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't expect it, but that exact call stuck with me. I mean, it replayed in my head every single night going to bed. But not once did I mention it to my guys. I never brought it up to anybody. Again, it was one of those things where I just kept it to myself because I felt like, hey, this is the job. I need to be used to this anyway.
Right.
I shouldn't be stressing out about this thing because it's our profession.
It's what you do.
So again, at the time, I saw it as a weakness.
I mean, so I'll just jump in real quick. So, I was a cargo pilot in the Navy. All right. And the very first strike when I went to Afghanistan, now I'm an ISR guy, very mild stuff in my opinion. And I'm talking compared to like, guys on the ground. The one strike that I remember is the very first one. And so uh, the aircraft before us found this guy who was on a list. We go out there, yep, it's him, and we execute. And there's another guy with him. When the missile hits, it explodes, and he runs out. It's infrared, and I just remember what is that stuff? It's trailing behind him. Ended up being his intestines, and then he fell and bled out. So the thing is I was 18,000 feet above. Okay, and in my mind, when I started having issues, I couldn't believe. I'm like, there's no way this is because of Afghanistan. Because man, I mean, I felt so pathetic and weak, right? Because I'm thinking about the soldiers on the ground. I'm thinking about the Marines on the ground and the shit that they see. I mean, I watched the videos. I'm like, holy crap! And the fact that are you telling
Yeah,
me this is down the road when the psychiatrist is like, yeah, man, this was a factor. I'm like, there's just no way because it just makes me feel weak and pathetic, and I didn't want to think like that. I was just like, I'm a fucking warrior. How the fucking something this tiny and small, uh, you know, be significant. And again, going back to it wasn't that one thing; it was a multitude of things that had piled on over time. If that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, and it definitely does. It's funny that you mentioned that what you call a trauma backpack. That I've never heard that term before, but it makes total sense. I mean, that's what it is. Is as we're building these things up, we keep pushing them down and down, which is exactly
Right.
what they tell us not to do the
Right.
entire fucking time, and we do it anyway. And I don't know if that's just a thing that men do or military people do,
Yeah.
but finally, I've gotten to a point where it's like we got to start unloading this backpack.
Right. And because they tell you to let it let it air out, but in reality, man,
Mhm.
what they're saying is, no, 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 dude, you need to shut the fuck up and just keep going. And I'll say, with
Yeah,
my mishap, when that happened, the reason I'm at 100% disability, right, is because the Navy did nothing to help me. Okay, they just simply they told me to the flight doc to shut the fuck up, right? Because I said, hey man, I'm having dreams of the aircraft crashing, and the flight doc. And he kind of talked to CEO, and they were like, "Dude, if you want to keep flying again, just be quiet and carry on." Right,
yeah,
and that's what I did. But unfortunately, that's going to affect me down the road.
yeah. If I could, I do want to touch on something you said earlier. You mentioned the missions where you were, flying ISR, and you're comparing the level of traumas that you had to those of the guys that are on the ground. And that's, I did the same thing. And it's important to note that that's a habit that I think we need to encourage people to stop doing that shit.
Right,
Honestly, because you can't compare traumas. It doesn't matter what your job is or
very true. Yeah,
because everybody has that different backpack.
yep,
Just because you
yeah,
dealt with something that may not be as serious in that moment, it doesn't mean that everything leading up to that moment wasn't as serious and it didn't
right.
affect you in a different way.
But yeah, exactly. No, you're absolutely right. It's just that we're in this mindset, we're taught, and for me, I have so much respect for those guys who fought on the ground. I was like, for me to have PTSD, right? How the fuck did I get this when those guys, they see the real shit? And yeah, you can't think like that. And my ex girlfriend, she saw a woman get hit by a city bus, and she came apart in three pieces, right? So that one time, that one traumatic event, just depends on how she handles it. But maybe she didn't handle it well, maybe she did. But you can't compare because we just don't know. For example, if I were to say, "Hey, you don't have your trauma's not as bad as mine. You didn't go to war." Well, you can't say that because you don't know
Yeah,
how it affected that person. Right.
yeah, it could easily be worse than yours.
Exactly.
And you just
Absolutely.
never know.
Yeah, you just never know. And so it's, it's hard to judge people, and you really shouldn't judge people. Now, I'm not talking about, we talked about, I the lieutenant who was way out of shape and stuff. And folks, well, perhaps stuff happened to him. I said, yeah, I'm not judging that. It's a completely different thing. There's that loud, it's like, hey, pick it up, move it out. Yeah. But how about, I mean, for you, so your crash happens, right? And you said you don't remember what happened, right? But now, post crash, you learn that your friends died. And of course, you're paralyzed, man. How have you come to grips with that? And I'm not saying that you have come to grips with it, but obviously it's a monster you have to face. It's only been just over
Yeah.
a year.
Right. So I'll be honest with you, and this is something I talked to my sister and my therapist about, and within the last 2 days. Currently, I am probably in the darkest place I've been up to date.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know exactly why. I don't know what happened, or maybe it's just the I don't know the way the process is of grief
Mhm.
and acceptance and things like that. But I hopped in my truck the other day. I drove for 4.5 hours, and I was screaming out the window and just like I cried for probably half of it, which isn't something I would normally admit, but here we are.
Right. Right.
Uh,
I mean, yeah. Yeah. I
but
mean,
yeah, it was just one of those
over.
things where it became so overwhelming that I had to do something,
Right.
and
You have to have an out at times. And you also, I think, need a support group as well. So you're driving, you're screaming, and believe me, dude, nobody's going to judge you. I mean, what happened to you is just crazy, and it's only been a year. I mean, might as well have been yesterday, right? I mean, that sounds awful,
it,
but
it feels like it.
yeah,
It does.
I mean, because you never know when grief's going to hit. And I'll just use, my brother dying, dude. There are times where I'm fine, I'm fine. It's been 6 years now, almost 6 years,
Mm,
and it'll just be something small, and I break down crying, and
yeah.
it's just that's grief. So how do you like right now? What things do you use to help you when you are, you know,
So I guess one of the best things I've learned, and I can thank the VA for this, is that I find myself in the best mental state when I'm surrounded by people with similar I don't want to say similar traumas, but similar issues, right? So I go to a group therapy for new injury, paralyzed, specifically spinal injury people, right? It's a group of us that within the last year or two, we have gotten this injury, it's changed our lives, and we kind of work through it together. And the best part about that is we can share our issues and also, share our how do we fix that? How do we cope with these different things? And just talking to those guys, I mean, it's once a month, it's every Thursday, and that 1 hour on Thursdays usually can change my entire mood. I can be in a very dark place, and I talk to those guys, and we just we bring each other up and we offer solutions, and that has become extremely helpful. So if I could
it's
recommend anything, it would be just to talk to people who are kind of in the same boat as you.
right,
You may not always find solutions, but at least it helps to have that support. Because I have endless support. I'll say that. You've seen
right,
the people who have watched
oh yeah,
our last video. Everybody back
yeah,
home, my
yeah,
support group is insane,
it's
and I'm
huge, yeah,
incredibly lucky to have those people.
right,
But they don't always understand exactly what I'm going through. So
right.
sometimes it's hard to lean on those people. You know what I mean?
No, dude, I absolutely understand. Back November of late October, mid October of 23, when I checked myself into rehab, right? And I have to do a physical, and there's a driver, and she works there, and she's a former addict, and we're driving and we're talking, and she just understood everything I was saying, and it was the first time, right? I know people around me who have never been addicts or alcoholics that they were, very, on my side, right? But they didn't understand, and that was the first time. And I said, "Wow, man, I cannot believe everything you're saying, rings with me." And she said, "Welcome to your tribe." Right? Because all of us have been there, done that. And maybe it's different drugs or alcohol, but the effects are the same and our experiences are very similar, and how we respond to it and how it affects us very similar. So it makes, for us, for you, for me, it makes total sense that it helps you. It helped me to be around that room. You're like, "Hi, I'm Chris, I'm an addict," and then start talking about whatever the topic was. And that was the great thing about going to AA and stuff, is hearing people talk about their journeys through it, because I understood it, and it made me feel better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. The problem is it can be incredibly difficult to get yourself to a point where you're comfortable enough, or you're just willing to go sit in that room and introduce yourself and say, "Hey, I'm so and so. Here's what I got going on." And like I said, it took me the loss of 3 friends and my legs essentially to get to a point where I was willing to ask for that help or willing to seek out people who can, support me in that way.
Yeah, I mean,
So it's been dark, it's been tough, but
it's
sorry, go ahead.
no. See, it's difficult for people to put themselves in your position. Not only did you lose, squadron mates and friends, but you're 28 years old at the time, or 27, right? And you lose your legs. You cannot walk anymore, and it's a devastating injury, and it's something that takes a lot to overcome. And most of us, and I cannot comprehend what strength that it takes. Yeah, when we're out in public, I see you now. I see you know, the good side. But what I don't see is those dark moments, those dark times. Like you said, you went and drove 4 hours and you're screaming and yelling because it affects you. And it's probably, of course, being paralyzed, but the other stuff it'll stay with you for the rest of your life. And
Yeah.
we talked about, I'd asked you before, like the survivor's guilt.
Mhm.
That's something that, how have you worked on that, work to, deal with that, the survivor's guilt?
Honestly, I'm still trying to figure that one out. I'm
Yeah.
gonna be totally honest. I mean, that's something that we talk about. I talked to my therapist about it quite a bit because she brought up that concern pretty early on because that's like the first thing she thought about. And I got to the
Right.
VA and she was like, "All right, you lost all these people, you made it. Why do you think that is?"
Right.
And I couldn't tell you why. I mean, I don't know why the hell I'm here. I shouldn't be here based
Right.
on everything that every surgeon has told me that I should not fucking be here. So yeah, the survivor's guilt is it's tricky. It's something I'm still actively working on because I just keep fighting with people tell you, oh, you made it for a reason. You'll find your purpose,
Right.
yada yada yada, and that's great. And I know people are trying to be helpful, but I have no fucking clue what it is.
Right.
I just don't. So
Understood, man, because,
trying to find that new purpose and find that drive to keep going is all I can currently do. And like I did an interview with a newspaper back home, and one of the big things I wanted to stress is that all I can do at this point is try to live my life for those guys, right? Because I know Casey, John, Chris, they would be pissed at me if I threw this all away, you know.
right. Because you
So
got
I'm doing it for them. I don't have much of a choice.
it makes sense, and it's hard to say, "Hey, man, I got to get through life." Half of you, you know, has to get
Right.
through life because, you don't have your legs, and it's a tough one to deal with. It's a tough one to understand. So I'll ask this: I don't know if you were religious beforehand or if you are religious now, and I'm not talking necessarily about, hey, I go to church and I pray, but having a personal relationship with God, or like when my brother died, what little I had faith, I was so angry at
Yeah.
God that he would take my brother like that. And it took time for me to come to grips with it. I mean, I don't know if I have. I have somewhat. So is that a part of your recovery, or,
And a lot of people are telling me it should be, and I should work on that relationship with God. And I grew up Catholic, and it's never been a huge part of my life.
right?
And maybe it should be. Maybe that's something that I can add to my repertoire
Yeah,
and use that as a coping mechanism. But to this
right.
point, it hasn't been.
Well, that's something that,
It's confusing.
yeah,
Like you said, it's why would this happen? Why
right,
God let this happen? So
right. And why would he
anger
save
kind of
me?
takes over. Right.
Yeah. No, dude, I absolutely understand that. And it's, that's something that's, I don't know, it's very personal when it comes to, believing in a higher power. Even though I do now, it was something that I just didn't want to come to grips with, and just made me angry. But, I'm doing the best I can. And of course, it's been 6 years. Like I said, yours has been just over a year, and it's still very, very fresh, and it's going to take time. And it's hard to imagine such a young guy. You're almost a kid, man. 'Cause I'm old. I'm an old guy, and that this happened to you. But if you're able to turn it around and use it in a positive light, man, I think that's fantastic. So
That's my real goal, man. Like we said, I have to find a new purpose because without a purpose, we're military. We're very goal oriented, goal
Yeah.
driven. You have to
Yep.
have some sort of greater purpose, and I don't know what that is, but doing something like this, right? Having
Yeah.
a platform to kind of talk about these issues and spread awareness, and this is maybe a small step towards that greater purpose. Being
Right.
able to help people. I love to teach. I was a flight instructor, and that was one of the things I was most proud of and most passionate about my entire life, was being able to take these new soldiers and grow them into leaders and grow them into crew members and things like that.
Yeah.
So although I can't really do that anymore, having the opportunity to I don't know, help anybody grow and achieve their goals,
Mhm.
I think that's something that I still have a lot of passion for, and I would want to work towards. So whatever that may look like in the future, I don't know, but
Yeah.
I think this is a small step towards that goal.
I mean, absolutely. And it's, when I OD, and I've been very open about it, like on my Facebook. It wasn't because I was looking for, sympathy. No. What I wanted to do was, hey, to let other people know, and especially vets, that, hey, man, this shit happens. It can happen to anyone. And, here's my journey back to being, something normal. And that's why I shared it, man. And I did. I had 4 different, they're all veterans too, contact me, personally. And I'm not saying, they asked for advice because I hate that term advice, but they opened up to me, and and they talked to me, and that's what I was there for. That's why I did it. If I just help one, man, if I just help one guy find, or girl find their way back, then it's been worth it. And so that's why I look at it, and that's why I am open. And I think some have questioned that, and that's fine. And again, this is my journey, and this is what I decided to do. And it's one of the reasons too. I mean, believe me, it's tough to do this page because I am showing the world, hey man, here I am. I'm not
Yeah,
a rock star, but when I met you, I mean, when we talked about it, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to go ahead
yeah,
and do this page, and it's going to be tough, and probably not going to get a lot of views, well, except for your video, which I think, by the way, was over 5,000 views, this morning. So, I mean, it's a goal that I set for myself, and that's part of my recovery process.
exactly. And like we just said, it's goal oriented, and it could be anything. It's not like you're doing this isn't a therapy, a conventional therapy, right?
Right.
But in a way, what we're doing right now, we're discussing it, we're getting these things
Yeah.
out, and
Talking
whatever
about it.
helps you. Exactly, exactly. And
Telling people that, hey man, I was driving for it, crying and yelling. It's just it's being open, and it's being, hey, this is how it's affecting me. And the
yeah,
journey back is not an easy one. And there are people who, unfortunately, the darkness consumes them and becomes too much, and they choose to end their lives. That's something that's, man, if we can just get one person, to get that help and to go. And actually, when I had walked out of AA one day, and this person said, hey, Chris, can I talk to you real quick? And there was an Air Force guy. He was convoy escort, saw a lot of action, and the VA was not helping him. And he said, can you help him? I said, I don't know if I can. But when he told me his story, I was very upset, what the VA had done, or the lack of what they had done. And basically, he wanted to either kill himself or kill someone else. He was in a mode where he wanted to hurt someone. So he called the hotline, and he goes to the VA because they said go to the VA, and he goes to front desk. They're like, oh, you have to go down to this this office. And he told them, hey man, I feel like hurting myself. So he goes down to this office. There's no one in there, and he signs the thing, and he sits for about 30 minutes, and somebody comes. I said, no, you need to go to the emergency room. I said, okay. So they send him by himself. He goes to the emergency room. He tells them, here's why I'm here. They put him in a room for 4 hours by himself and just left him. And he finally just went home. And it made me so angry that the fact that, I mean, the VA, like, not one person even tried. And I was able actually to put him in contact with Ted Cruz's office, us being here in Texas. And it was crazy because the very next day he contacted them, and they sent like a form. The next day he had appointments. People were calling him, but it shouldn't take that much effort, right? But that's the idea, is that it made me feel good because I was there to help someone.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, while you talked about him wanting to either kill himself or kill somebody else, that's another really tricky subject and something that's very important for this month, right? So I lost a good buddy of mine, Trevor Peck,
Okay.
shortly after the accident. He took his own life, and he was one of those guys where you would have never guessed it.
Right.
None of us had a fucking clue. I didn't know, and he was one that even while I was in the hospital, he was coming to visit me pretty regularly. I was checking it, always texting him and checking in on him. I had absolutely no idea, and I
Yeah.
feel like you usually don't. I think a lot
Yeah.
of us know somebody who has taken their own life, and usually you just don't. They don't show those signs,
Right.
or we're not looking for those signs.
Right. And my my therapist, just real quick, she had said that oftentimes she said she looked for this in me, but
Yeah,
those who kill themselves sometimes become very happy. The reason they become happy is because they now figured, hey, I have found a way out of this pain. And now I'm happy because 3 days from now, I'm going to off myself and the pain will be no longer. And that's why they show this emotion. And you're like, man, how could he seem like he was so happy? Well, not really.
yeah, and that's again, looking for those signs is important. Again, yeah, it's one of those things where we take the classes,
Yeah.
and when you're in the military, the resilience classes and the suicide prevention classes, and a lot of people don't take them seriously until you find yourself in a situation where you've lost a buddy to
Right.
something like that, and now
Yeah.
you want to be looking for those signs.
Yep.
So if there's one thing I can tell anybody who watches this is call call a fucking buddy. Whether it's somebody that you deployed with 10 years ago or it's somebody that you're currently in a unit with that maybe you just don't talk to as much.
Yeah.
Call your buddies, check in on them.
Use that system. Yeah, and and of course, if you don't have anyone, you can always call 911 and they will help you. But yeah, I mean, it's important to create, that family buddy system, somebody that you can talk to. And I actually have that, and I have 4 or 5 people that absolutely, if I were to feel that way, boom, I'm on the phone with them. And
Yeah.
that's one thing that saved my life is uh, it was my daughter, and I had OD'd and I didn't feel well, and I didn't really do it on purpose. I mean, I didn't do it on purpose, but I was just doing so much steroids, and I texted her, said I don't feel good, and when she found me, my kidneys had failed, my my liver had shut down, and I had a heart attack, right? And so just having that, the person I text, she needed to take it seriously, and she came, and she found me. So yeah,
I don't know if you're comfortable talking about this or not, but we
I
haven't really discussed, offline, the dependency on medications or the addictions to medications and things like that.
yeah, let's talk about it. Yeah, I'm comfortable talking about it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how did that start for you? Where did that kind of come from?
Yeah, and so, my mishap, my crash, I hurt my back pretty good. So I've had,
Yeah.
awful back pain. Of course, with last month with my MRI, it showed just how messed up my back is, and I've been walking around with a broken back. I have a fractured vertebrae, and etc. So around 2014, I'm living in Corpus Christi, and my back is just killing me. I get back from Afghanistan, and I go to the doctor, and my then wife, she said, "Hey, the doc gave me hydrocodone." So I go and I take hydrocodone, and it was, dude, I was as happy as I could be, and it made me euphoric. But of course, the more I used it, the more I had to take. And so what happened down the road is when I saw a psychiatrist, and they're looking at me, the VA is looking at me, and she asked, "Why do you think you became dependent on this drug, addicted to it?" And I said, "Well, because it just made me happy. It made me." And she said that the drug company that created it, um, they put a chemical in it, and about 32% of those people who take it, they get addicted to it, and generally it's people who suffer from depression. And I thought, you know, I was depressed, but I didn't know it at the time, and so that's something that I like, and it just because it made me feel good. And again, at first you think 1 or 2 and, yeah, great, but then, I mean, dude, towards the end, I'm popping, like, fucking 8 pills at a time, and it's doing hardly anything for me because 'cause I'm looking for that happiness, Once again, I was looking for it and I wasn't finding it. So, yeah, that's what happened to me. Yep, that's how I get addicted.
Yeah, I feel like that's a pretty common, especially with that drug. I know a lot of people who have had the same issues, and
Mm,
in my recovery, I had people reaching out to me, sending messages that specifically said like, "Hey, dude, be careful because they're going to give you all these drugs and you're going to want to keep taking them." I was talking to a friend the other day and I was talking about some of these. I get like really bad nerve pains. A lot of my muscular skeletal pains, I'm either used to it or they've kind of just subsided. Right now, it's mostly nerve pains. And we were talking about
yeah,
because at the early stages of my recovery, I had so many things broken and I was in so much constant pain that I mean, they were just kind of throwing fentanyl at me just to get me to
right,
essentially shut up because I
right,
was screaming in pain.
right,
My poor mom had to sit there, hold on to my hand while I just screamed in pain.
man,
So, they I had a decent amount of fentanyl in the beginning, and I remember feeling it coming into my system. You
Right.
know, they would throw it in an IV, give me a bolus of it, and I just feel it flow through me. And
Yeah.
that was like the only time in those early stages where I felt any sort of relief at all.
Yeah.
Is as I was so, and I think they noticed that because as we progressed in my recovery, obviously they don't like using it if you don't have to, but
Right.
I had asked for it because there was times where I was in so much pain. I was like, I know this works for me.
Right.
Can I please have
Because
it? And they're like,
you needed an out, dude, from that pain. You needed
right,
something. Yeah.
right. But what I wasn't understanding at the time is that I was slowly developing almost a dependency on it, which is like that's the last fucking drug you want to have any sort of
Right.
dependency on,
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they all knew that, but I got that feeling where this is the only thing that's going to give me some relief. I need it. And this isn't something. This is going to come to a surprise to pretty much everybody because this isn't something I've ever mentioned to anybody. But it's one of those things where I was lying in bed just sorry, it's shaking,
That's
just wishing that I could get some more of it, and I really struggled without it
mhm.
for a long time. Um, and luckily, the nurses and doctors that I had, they were able to talk to me and work me through it. So I didn't develop anything worse than that. But
Right.
it's a slippery slope, man. It's very easy to. Nice to meet you. Thank you. Very easy to fall into that trap, and so that's always curious about yours, how it happened to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and so later on down the road, post my brother's death, and I had stopped using it. And I remember when I quit cold turkey at some point, and it was 2 weeks of hell, going through that. And then, later on, I really didn't use it too much, but I started using Ambien. And Ambien was, I would wake up in the morning, eat breakfast, take a couple, sleep to lunch, and then, wake up, eat lunch, take more. I would just sleep. I mean, in 2 days, I would go through a bottle. And actually, this happened to me 2021. I think so. It was around there. Um, my girlfriend at the time didn't hear from me for like 2 days. Just calling nothing. And she comes to my apartment and she's banging the door. And I answer the door. She's like, where the hell you been? And she can tell I'm drugged out of and I don't remember anything of this. She sees an Ambien bottle I got 2 days prior. So I had 30. There were only two left. I took 28 in 2 days. I wasn't trying to hurt
Holy
myself.
shit!
I just got
Yeah.
in a zombie mode. And, there's Caesar and, there's shit in the house. And um, I think she knew by that time that I had a problem. And it,
Mm.
not necessarily, it was like, hey, man, I have to have drugs, but I was dealing, with demons. And I wanted, I just didn't want to think about the pain. And that's the thing. I started using steroids, and people are like, oh, man, steroids like the ones I was using, Trembolone, and tests are like, well, that doesn't make you feel good. I said, no, but it made me not care about anything, right? I had rage. I didn't have to fucking care. And the thing is that, you know, before, I refused to get help. When I was married, my wife time had said, hey, I think you should go see a therapist. And I thought, fuck that. That's for pussies. I'm a warrior. I'm a, naval aviator. I'm not going to get help. I don't need it. And then, fast forward, file for divorce. I'm in California, and once again, the demons have come, and I simply refuse to get help. And that's also part of that. You talk about survivor's guilt. You know, the day that I OD'd, and I'm in the hospital that night, and my brother, I thought about him. I said, "Fuck, man," And my mom texted me and said, he didn't have a choice. You have a choice, and and so that was, it was
Yeah.
it ended up destroying my relationship, because I, was with someone who, who tried to teach me about love and tried to teach me about, what a great relationship could have, but I ended up destroying everything. And it was because I did not deal with those demons. And I turned to drugs, to help deal with it. Anyways,
Interesting. Yeah.
and if what's good here is I think you recognize, uh, what's going on, and you recognize the ways where you can continue to operate. It's so fresh, right? I mean, and it just a year ago, and to be 29. No, you're 29 or 30 now. How old are you?
I'm 30 now. I
Oh
was
yeah,
29. No, I was 28.
when it
28 when it
happened.
happened.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, you have to go through life now. I mean, with a an injury like you suffered, and dude, it's got to be tough.
It ain't fun.
Yeah, no, dude, I have no
But
doubt.
like, I mean, what choice do you have,
Yeah,
really?
I mean, there's nothing
You
you can do
have to
about
push
that.
on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, keep going, man, and so that's why, like I said, this channel, when I met you, you were an inspiration. I thought, "Hey, man, let's do it." Inspiration to do this, this video, and maybe my other videos don't get watched a whole lot, but I know yours does, right? And so, because you have, these fans that follow you, and so I know at least, folks in the military, and maybe some suffering will watch this, you know.
I hope
So,
they do. I hope they
yeah,
do. I hope they pull something out of it because
yeah,
yeah, it's hard to talk about, man. It really is, but it's stuff that has to be talked about. You have
yeah.
to
I
talk
mean,
about it.
the only way to get better, man, is one, you have to admit that you have a problem, or you have to admit that you're suffering. You have to admit all these things that might be embarrassing. And it's like, my stuff, yeah, okay, there's the crash and, there's stuff like that, but a lot of stuff I did to myself because I did not get help. Now with yours, again, the crash is not your fault. I mean, it's just it happened, but the idea is learning how to deal with it and learning how to live your life and live a good life. So, and from my perspective, it seems you're doing well, but again, I don't see the dark times at night, and that's when the demons come, man.
Yeah, they
But
do. They do. And
yeah,
I'm still working. And again, I don't have this figured out. I
right.
don't have this solved.
You're just
This is
yeah,
an active situation where it's evolving throughout the day. Like I have, I dealt with the Afghanistan dreams, whatever. That's kind of in the past. But now I have new dreams where, I blacked out in the crash, so I don't
okay, yeah,
actually remember. But I
right,
have dreams of what were happening, and I'm trying to figure out if they're actually memories that are coming back slowly and
yeah,
like in little pieces.
right,
Because I have dreams of clips, and I feel that feeling of inertia where you get, the G's, you
yeah,
get
well,
thrown
yep,
against a wall. And as we were spinning, obviously that's what was happening. So I wake up from those, and I'm just like, I don't know if it's real or if it's something I'm
right.
making up. I woke up and I fell asleep in my recliner a couple days ago, and I remember jolting, and I woke up, and my sister was watching me on the couch, and she was just like, "Are you good?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I'm fine." And what it
Right.
was that dream. I was just spinning, and all of a
Thing.
sudden I jolted,
I was going to
and
say,
that was tough.
well, for 17 years, I had plane crash dreams for 17 years, and
Yeah.
I did EMDR. That was the very first thing I ever did when I
Oh, you
went to
did?
see. Yeah, yeah. I've done EMDR twice now. So I did it in 2020. That was the first thing I did. I said, hey, I want these plane crash dreams to go away. And,
Yeah.
I count on one hand since May of 2020 when we did that. I've had maybe two since then, but I had them all the time.
Okay.
And same thing because when aircraft,
EMDR.
yeah, yeah, they'll have to look it up in terms of what each thing means. And I think there are certain ways to do it. How we did it was there's these two vibrating little pads, and I would hold them, and she, and then later on he would read, like, I forget what they were reading, certain passages, just talking about certain things, and I had my eyes
Yeah.
closed, and I would just follow along and just and this was every 20 seconds or so they would vibrate just for a bit, and then it would stop. And so that's what I did, and I wish I could explain more, but it is better if somebody just looks it up. And we did like maybe 12 sessions, 10 maybe, like for the first time. And, my dreams went away, man. It was amazing. And then what I did, yeah, last year, I did it for some other stuff. And, it was basically, I did it trying to understand as to why, my crash happened, why certain things happened. And I was able to come to grips. I mean, it allowed my mind to, to open up and to relax. And I would say that's one thing going back when I didn't know I had PTSD or anxiety, but I never slept. Like, dude, I never slept. So yeah, I turned to Ambien, I turned to other things to try to sleep, or I would go 3 days without sleep, and then of course I'm so exhausted I'd sleep, and then I'm up again, and that sort of thing. And so I was still having some problems, and I was able to use EMDR to help me. So yeah, it was a huge benefit for me.
I might have to try that out. My therapist has given me a couple different options, things to try, and at this
Yeah,
point, I'm open to anything. I'm willing to try anything
yeah,
because
absolutely,
it's
man. Yeah,
it,
just
it
asking
gets
about it.
pretty dark. But
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
basically I'm I'm basically on my third chance at life right now. So I don't know. I don't think we've talked about this, but there was a point where um, obviously the crash happened. I got very injured, but I was okay. They found me. I was awake. I was talking. Well, in the process of getting all these surgeries to fix myself, there was a certain spinal surgery that I got where I actually coded in the
Really?
process.
Wow.
So my heart stopped for a few minutes, and I was essentially dead,
It's crazy.
which isn't something that I don't think a lot of people know about my story.
Hmm.
That's not something that we talk about a whole lot. It was
Right.
obviously a very tough time for my family. They were all there.
Yeah.
And that was one of those things where, I went to sleep getting ready for the surgery and I woke up in a room full of people staring at me, just like freaking out. Um,
Yeah.
and that
It's
was one
not
of
your
those times
time.
where it's, I guess, but,
Yeah.
I woke up and it's something that my father and I actually talked about recently. And uh, they said it's like my second chance, right? It's like, get to start again. It's your alive date, whatever. But really, in my opinion, I should have died in that crash anyway.
Right.
So I'm on my third go here.
Yeah.
I need to do something. I need to make something out of this, and I think that's going to have to be my inspiration moving forward because
Yeah. Use that. Yeah. As
maybe there is a reason. I don't know, man, but I just want to be able to help other people to not be in the situation that I was in the other day in my car or in my truck because that
I
was
think.
about as low as I've been. That was fucking
Right.
brutal.
Well, you can always, call me, and that's also when I text you and stuff, and text back. I get a little worried, but I'm like, you know what? He's got a big, group that he can turn to, and so I always understand. I'm like, hey, man, he's going through stuff that I
Yeah,
can't even imagine, and so, but I think helping others, man, that is the way to goodness, and that is the way to recovery. And so, just keep it on, man, and hopefully
it
people
can
will
it
like
can
this
be a
video.
Yeah, and it can be a little bit hypocritical, right? To say, tell other people to do all these things and not be
Yeah,
able to do them yourself.
it's true.
I have friends where we do the same thing. We give each other advice, and then we laugh about it and say, "Oh, yeah, maybe I should be taking my own advice," kind of thing.
Right, right. Yeah,
But again, just I feel better by making other people feel better. If
right.
I can help somebody along the way,
Absolutely, man.
it
I
helps
mean,
out more.
that also, yeah, that makes me feel better. So, all right, brother. Well, you got anything else for now?
I don't think so, man.
All right, man. Good
Yeah, I
discussion.
appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming and we doing this, and maybe we'll think of something else in the near future. All right.
Dude.
Yeah. Before I forget, like, subscribe. Who's ever still with us, I appreciate it. It helps the channel. And there we go, man. So bunk out.